The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC Polling Group, here this week with MPG Vice President Rich Parr. Today, I am back from my travels on the coast of Kenya, and because I'm here with Rich, both of us are pollsters, we are going to go deep on polling this week on a whole range of topics. It's Thursday, October 23rd. All right, Rich, we're here today. It's an all MPG cast today.
Yes, welcome back, Steve. We heard rumors that you were riding around on some motorcycles on the Kenyan coast last week. Is there any truth to that?
There is truth to that. There's photographic evidence of that, as you kindly noted in the intro last week. We were down in a place called Watamu, which is right on the coast of Kenya, and one of the things that's just true about it is that a lot of the transportation there happens either in these tiny little vehicles called tuk-tuks, which are like three-wheeled, like the things you might see like in Rome or something if you've ever been to Europe. And they're these tiny little delivery trucks, and you can ride around inside of them, or you can ride around, one or more of you, on the back of a motorcycle, which we also did. So bit of an adventure, not as crazy as riding motorcycles in Nairobi, but still fun.
That does sound like fun. And, while you were away, we had our own transportation news here in Massachusetts. We've had a changing of the guard at the top of the transportation department again. And our own train zaddy, Phil Eng, is taking over and kind of having two hats for the time being, running the T and running Mass DOT. So we will see how long that obtains for, whether they put in a new person at the top and when that will take place. But that is sort of the news as it relates to transportation back here in Massachusetts.
That's right. And the other news, Rich, is that I noticed you actually bought into the term train daddy. Is that something that we're now all using, or is that just for this podcast?
Well, I call him train zaddy, right? Because this is the new term. Zaddy is for sort of like hot grandfather, I think. Oh, so that is what I've heard for Phil Eng.
Oh, save me.
This came up actually in the debates, the New York City mayoral debate last night. There was a reference to their own train daddy, who is the now departed head of the MTA. That actually came up in the debate. So then people were popping up online saying, well, we have one up here in Massachusetts too, and putting pictures of Phil Eng up. So he has become quite the celebrity for his work on the T, and we'll have to see, does that translate over into running the roads and the bridges and the complete streets programs and all the other things that the DOT does that aren't related to the T.
Absolutely. Certainly a lot more to come on that, and we'll be following along closely as we always do. But for today, we have polling. We have polling on the governor's race. We have polling on national stuff, just all kinds of polling. So, Rich, what do you say? Should we get into it?
Giddy up, Steve.
Oh, God. Okay. We've got it. That will kill Jen. She might actually die.
So, Steve, you're here to discuss the one thing that could pull you away from the back of a motorbike in Kenya, and that is new polling. What do you have for us this week?
That's right. There's new polling on a whole range of issues, and we're going to weave across some state polling, some national polling, look at things on the shutdown, talk about whether people like bulldozing the White House. I think maybe there's a bit of a spoiler there in my tone, but we're actually going to start with some new polling on Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey. And that's because, as they do, Morning Consult has again published their list of all 50 governors and along with their approval rating. So basically, they're doing polling pretty much continuously. And as a part of that polling, they ask for approval ratings both of every state's senator and of every state's governor. And then about once a quarter, they publish a list basically saying, okay, how many people approve or disapprove of each state's governor and of each state's senator. And that list for governor has just come out. And they found Maura Healey is actually now in the top 10. The top 10 as far as net favorability meaning how many people view her favorably minus how many people view her unfavorably. When you net that out, you've got what's called net favorability, and there you've got Maura Healey in the top 10. So the actual number, the number that say that they approve in this morning consult poll is 59%, and the number who disapprove of Governor Maura Healey is 29%. That actually also reminded me a lot of two other numbers which have come out recently. One from yours truly, us truly, here at MassINC Polling. We had her at 56.33 a little while ago, so basically the same, a couple points different. And the Fiscal Alliance Foundation, which of course is related to Mass Fiscal, had 59% approve and 33% disapprove. So three numbers kind of all right there in the same range.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, this really kind of continues a trend of, voters in Massachusetts and in Boston as well, tending to like their leaders, right? So Charlie Baker, when he was governor, had even higher approval ratings than Maura Healey is seeing right here. Marty Walsh, when he was mayor of Boston, had very strong approval ratings. Now Michelle Wu. Going back to Deval Patrick, there was a period of time when he was a little bit unpopular, but he kind of bounced back. And went on to win his second term against Baker back in 2010. So it's really hard to unseat an incumbent here in Massachusetts. You'd have to go back a ways to find the last two governors or senators to lose. Scott Brown lost in 2012. Of course, he being a Republican, that's kind of a little bit against the trend in federal national elections in Massachusetts. And then Mike Dukakis back in 1978. And then, of course, he went on to become governor later and be the governor during the 1980s. And, of course, the last time a Boston mayor lost was way back in 1949, and that was James Michael Curley. So we had Healey only slightly less popular, as Steve mentioned, in the poll that we did recently, 56-33, a little bit tighter. But that was a little bit while ago, so maybe those numbers have shifted a bit. The thing that stood out to me in that particular poll that we did was that only 20% strongly approved of Healey. So, there was a lot of people who are kind of in the somewhat approved category, and I don't think Morning Consult breaks this out by strongly and somewhat, so we don't really have a good comp there. But maybe if there's anything to be said about Healey, at least in our poll, was that there wasn't a ton of enthusiasm. There wasn't a ton of people who were just really intensely into what she was doing as governor, but a majority of people were in favor of how she was doing the job of governor.
That actually did remind me a lot of former Governor Charlie Baker, where he had sky-high numbers, but there also wasn't a whole ton of enthusiasm there. Oftentimes you'd see, 70% approve, but you'd see, more than half of that would be somewhat approve. And when you'd look at specific issues, oftentimes his numbers were much lower. So, I think what sticks out to me is that there's a lot of consistency here. Of course, we got that nasty article in the Boston Herald questioning whether or not our poll was scientific when we found Maura Healey at that place. And now we've got two other polls that basically show the same thing. And I think, echoing and reflecting kind of what you said about how often governors, mayors, and senators win and lose, I think that's important just to remember in all of this coverage is it's really hard to unseat an incumbent anywhere in any circumstance. But here in Massachusetts, it hardly ever happens. Scott Brown is an exception, of course, but his victory was also kind of an exception and kind of a freak occurrence. So other than that, you have to go back a number of decades before you get to any instance where somebody even modestly popular was unseated. So something to keep in mind as we head into, I guess now just a couple weeks from now, we've got the almost obligatory vote for Boston mayor. But then as we head into 2026 with both a Senate and a gubernatorial election, just definitely something to keep in mind. Rich, you also did note, though, that there were some other interesting things that rounding up the other numbers in New England, and which ones stood out to you. So what caught your eye elsewhere from those Morning Consult numbers?
Yeah, so Morning Consult has a sort of an interactive map on their website of all of the governors and their net approval ratings. And it's actually a lot of green. Like there's only 2 states where governors are underwater, meaning that there are more people who disapprove of how they're doing than approve, which is an interesting story if you think about it, given how negative people are, I think, about the federal government right now and the executive branch. I mean, the ratings for Congress, the ratings for president are definitely very much underwater, but people seem to be liking their governors. And that's pretty much the case here in Massachusetts. The most popular governor in America is Republican Phil Scott of Vermont. He has a net 55 point net approval rating. Ned Lamont down in Connecticut, 33 points, a little bit more popular than Healey, kind of in the same tier, I would say. Then you have Kelly Ayotte, who is a new governor, Republican in New Hampshire, former senator from New Hampshire, now governor. She's doing pretty well up there. The only governor that's underwater, and only one of two governors underwater in the entire country, Dan McGee in Rhode Island, Democrat, he is underwater by just 4 points. And then finally, Janet Mills, who is the governor of Maine, she's +5. So, just above water. And I think that's really interesting because she's just announced that she's going to be running for Senate next year against Susan Collins. And of course, there are some other Democrats who are in the primary already for that race. So we'll have to see what a 5, just being above water means for her in that primary race. And then potentially if she gets through to the general election in November of 2026.
Yeah, that Maine Senate race, boy, I almost wish we could, do a Maine podcast for the next 6 months or so, because there's just so much going on there, so much of interest, and the stakes are so high. But we actually have a whole ton of other stuff to get to, and we are going to zoom out a little bit, because there's a lot of other polling that kind of all fits together. And it's about a lot of different stuff, but there's a common theme. So we're going to start first with some stuff on the No Kings rally, which is now a little while ago, but there's a whole ton of polling on it, and then explore kind of what some other dynamics from other polls tell us about, that protest and where it came from and what they were saying and what the other issues are that are related. So, Rich, why don't you start just walking us through what you found on the polling specifically related to the protest?
Yeah. So, again, something that you weren't here for, Steve. You were in Kenya, but we had a pretty big day of protest in America here on this past Saturday. According to the organizers, more than 7 million Americans, I've seen estimates of 5 to 6 million Americans, attended one of 2,700 No Kings rallies across the country. And, you can see all kinds of wonderful signs and witty stuff on the internet from these protests, in addition to the crowd pictures, which are pretty impressive from some of the major cities, including Boston. I will say Boston had a really strong turnout for these rallies. And we had a bunch of them in other parts of the state as well. But protesters were there to object to Donald Trump's policies, but I think maybe more so they were objecting to how he is implementing them in almost a unilateral or king-like manner. And since those protests, I mean, it's a hard number to ignore, but Republicans have tried to marginalize the protests and the protesters, saying that they are paid by George Soros or that they're communists or that they don't represent all Americans. CNN political analyst Aaron Blake has rounded up kind of some of the recent polling on this topic. We don't have polling about the No Kings protests specifically, but we do have polling about concerns about Trump's use of his power, his overreach, or perhaps the fact that that he is going beyond what a typical president would be doing, and that of course relates to kind of, is this protest really tapping into something that more Americans than would show up in the streets for a protest are feeling right now?
Give us a couple of those numbers, because they were pretty interesting, and different organizations asked them in different ways. So what were some of the numbers that stood out to you as far as how people are reacting to this idea that Trump's exercise of his power may be more like a king than like a president?
Yeah, and I would encourage people to read the article. It's on CNN, because it's a good summary not only of what these numbers show, but also it does do a fair job, I think, of describing how the Republicans are characterizing the protests as well. But just for example, let's start with CNN since they wrote the article. 56% in a July poll said that Trump has gone too far in using the power of the presidency and the executive branch. And that was up 4 points from 52% in February when they last asked that question. Similarly, 57% said Trump had gone too far in using his presidential power to achieve his goals in an April AP NORC poll. The Washington Post and Ipsos found that 62% thought Trump had gone beyond his authority as president in a September poll, so we're getting a little bit more recent, a little bit closer to time. Pew said 69% said Trump was exercising more presidential power than other recent presidents, and 49% said both that and that it was bad for the country that he was doing that. So that's according to Pew. And then finally, the New York Times Santa College poll in September found 54% of registered voters said he is exceeding the powers available to him. So there is a good body of evidence that actually a majority of Americans think that Donald Trump is doing something that is unusual here, that he is not behaving like a president, that he is behaving perhaps more akin to a king, which is, of course, the whole point of the No Kings protests.
Right. And there was also a poll from PRRI where they did basically forced choice on a couple issues. And what that essentially means is you give people two options and say which one's closer to your point of view. And you recognize when you write a poll like this that neither one probably fully characterizes what somebody thinks about the issue. But the options that they gave them were quite stark. So this one of the questions was whether Trump is, quote, a potentially dangerous dictator whose power should be limited before he destroys democracy, or he's a strong leader who should be given the power he needs to restore American greatness. And on that question, 56% chose the first and 41% chose the second. And there were a couple other binaries that they gave like that where people basically were more expressing alarm at the way that Trump is exercising his power rather than thinking that, yes, this is necessary and good. So from there, we're going to move over to what I think is the most visible right now expression of this exercise of power, and that is the fact that the East Wing of the White House lays at this moment when we're recording partly in rubble, and depending on who you believe, it will be all in rubble by this weekend, as the New York Times is now reporting. So, Rich, there's also polling on that topic from YouGov. What did they find?
Yes, so this is actually pretty fresh polling from YouGov. They went out into the field to ask this question in a few different ways, actually. And the numbers do vary depending on how you ask it. But, for example, if you ask Americans, do you approve or disapprove of the decision to demolish part of the East Wing of the White House as part of the renovation for this ballroom that Donald Trump is claiming that he wants to build here, you do find that 40% strongly disapprove, 13% somewhat disapprove. So a majority of Americans disapprove of this demolition of the East Wing as part of this project. Now, YouGov did actually ask about the project itself. Do you think the addition of a 90,000 square foot ballroom will have a positive or negative impact on the White House? And there the numbers are a little bit more, evenly split, I would say. You've got 23% saying that it's going to have a positive impact on the White House, 30% saying it's going to be neither positive nor negative, and 35% say that it's going to have a negative impact on the White House. As you would imagine, there's some pretty clear partisan signals on both of these questions. 63% of Democrats are saying that putting this ballroom in is going to have a negative impact. 46% of Republicans say that it's going to have a positive impact. And then similarly, Republicans are really the only group who a plurality of whom approve of demolishing the East Wing as part of this project, 44%. But 27% of Republicans are not sure, right? So there may be some of those not sures who are just not feeling great about this, but aren't willing to go all the way into full disapproval mode, given partisanship on this question.
Yeah, that number actually stuck out to me too. The fact that Republicans aren't necessarily completely sold on the demolition of the East Wing. And I think that the numbers that you kind of outlined where people are kind of okay with the idea of a ballroom or maybe somewhat ambivalent or not all on one side reflects probably where the conversation was prior to these images starting to come out, because there had been stories about, there's going to be this ballroom, but then the idea that, we're going to rip off part of the East Wing or potentially just destroy the whole thing, I think took a lot of people by surprise and was just in the last couple of days. So those images certainly are making the rounds. They're certainly percolating into people's consciousness. But then from there, where we're going to head is over into just what this means in terms of partisanship overall, what it looks like for the generic ballot and so forth, because all of this is kind of starting to have an impact on, where 2026 might go, what Donald Trump's approval rating is, even how people are identifying in terms of their own partisanship. So, Rich, where should we start? You want to start with party ID on this?
Yeah, I think we can. Let's do that. So, the venerable polling institution Gallup has just released its most recent read on party ID, which is to say how folks identify themselves as a Democrat or a Republican or something else in all of the surveys that they do. They've rolled up these numbers and published the most recent findings just this week. And it does show a bit of a shift that the number of folks who are identifying as Democrats has gone up. The number of folks who have identified as Republicans has gone down rather sharply. And now Democrats lead in that by a net 7 points, which is a pretty good position. It's about as good a position as they've been in since when Joe Biden was, first starting his term. So this could be a signal that all of what we're seeing here in terms of the policies of the Trump administration, or perhaps the way that the Trump administration is implementing those policies, is starting to kind of shift the political winds a little bit and coming into 2026.
Right. And I think there's two other things worth noting about that. One is that we talked maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago about the surge in party registration that's happened recently for Republicans and some of the things that might be behind that. And this is one of the things, this is a number I think that does show that the surge in party registration isn't the only dynamic, and it doesn't necessarily show that there's a surge towards Republicans, that some of it might be structural. We actually have more people now identifying as Democrats than we've had in recent years. So just something to keep in mind there. And the other thing is that it's reflective of a lot of other polling that we're seeing on things like whether the Trump administration has gone too far, on things like cuts to healthcare programs, cuts in federal funding and grants to universities, implementation of tariffs. These are all items from a PRRI survey, increase in funding for ICE, and then closing major federal agencies. And on all of those, you see 50 to 60% saying that they think that the Trump administration has gone too far. So I think there's a lot of evidence from the polling overall that that people are uncomfortable with the Trump administration's policies. And then also the last one is that people on a number of polls are more likely to say that they're blaming Republicans in Congress rather than Democrats for the government shutdown. So not a ton of good news for Republicans overall. And that's how the numbers all come together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say now, but that American public opinion is sort of like a thermostat, that when one party comes into power, they push their advantage as much as they can. And in some cases, the public will then react against that and start to say, well, this is going a little bit further than I wanted, right? This is not what I voted for. And I think that's what you're seeing in these PRRI numbers. And I think what's interesting about those numbers is that they sort of, the question they asked was, have you gone too far? And then they broke it out by these various policies. And I think that that's an interesting way to think of it, because I think the debate among Democrats has been a little bit of, should we be pushing our advantage on the issues that we know we have a structural advantage on, like healthcare? People tend to think Democrats are better on healthcare, so let's make the shutdown about healthcare. Or the other school of thought is, there's just something abnormal about the way that the government is being run now. We should make that the issue. And I think that what this is showing is that there's a way to kind of talk about this, that people may not like the policy, and they might not like how far the policy is going. And there's a way to sort of combine those two schools of thought about how to approach this current moment for Democrats. And I think that this polling shows that there's an opportunity there for them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and far be it from me to give strategic advice to either party, but I think you can just look at the numbers and see that, where the American public's mind is, and, take from that what you will in terms of strategy. But the way things are going right now certainly does not seem to be making people overall all that comfortable. Certainly not Democrats. And on some of these issues, particularly the White House thing, even Republicans aren't necessarily on board. So lots more to come on this for sure. We'll revisit this issue often, I would guess, but for now, we'll be right back.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to you by our Pink Panther Investigations Department here at Horse Race Global Media Empire headquarters. Rich, there was a burglary, I gather, a heist at the Louvre in Paris. Lots of stuff was stolen, and it seems, from what I can tell, like they literally just rolled a construction vehicle up, went through the window, grabbed the jewels, and drove off on motorcycles. Is there more to it than that, or is that actually what happened?
I mean, that seems to be the gist of it. It's a really amazing story. I mean, this happened on a Sunday at 9:30 in the morning. This is not something that happened in the dead of night. It apparently took them 7 minutes to put a ladder up to a window in the Louvre, get in, steal some really priceless, I've heard them described as the kind of like the crown jewels of France. I think they go back to maybe the Napoleonic period. And that was it. They went in, they went up a ladder, they came down the ladder, they got on some motorbikes, and they went away. So we're finishing the horse race, and we're starting the horse race with motorbikes this week. I like the symmetry of that. So I just think it's a great story. I mean, I don't know. Let's let the jewel heists are fun, right? I mean, my favorite movie growing up was The Great Muppet Caper, and the Muppets put more work into going in and getting that jewel than these thieves in France seem to do. So I'm not sure what happened there. Where was the security? Is it this easy to rob stuff from the Louvre? I have a lot of questions here about the Louvre's security procedures coming out of this story.
Yeah, it does seem like in the movies, it looks much harder to steal stuff from a museum. You know, they're always like dangling from the ceiling and like going around these like laser, grids and stuff like that. And instead, this one, and actually the Gardner heist in Massachusetts was much more just like smash and grab, obviously different circumstances, but even so, it just was very interesting to read. The articles are actually also quite interesting about things like just how you secure this gigantic former palace that's now turned into a museum with millions of people coming through. The fact that the security protocol, which the New York Times actually reported, is to clear everybody out of the room if somebody's robbing everything rather than to go in and confront the robbers. So that may have also assisted them.
I don't know, Steve. I can't buy printer ink at Walmart without having someone open a case for me. I just don't know how this happened. Like, let's get some consultants from Benton, Arkansas, over there to the Louvre to see if they can tighten things up a little bit.
Put Walmart security on the job. That will definitely make it happen. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I'm Steve Casella, signing off this week with Rich Parr. Jen will be back next week. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Casella. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com if you have any plans for daring jewel heists that you would like us to participate in. Don't forget to give the Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download, and reach out to us here at the MassINC Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. For now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.